parents abandoned me for my sister. Now they're begging me to save them after she stole $2.5 million, ruined their lives, and then I still remember that cold, gray New Year's Eve when everything changed. I was just 6 years old, barely old enough to understand the weight of the words my parents spoke. "We'll be back soon, Gregory," my mother, Caroline, said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She crouched in front of me, her hands on my shoulders, while my father, Mark, stood silently by the car. Behind them, my grandfather Henry stood on the porch of his ranch, watching the scene unfold with a furrowed brow. "You're going to have so much fun here, kiddo," Caroline added, forcing cheer into her voice. "Grandpa Henry will teach you all about the horses and cows. It'll be an adventure." I nodded, clutching the stuffed bear in my arms. At that age, I still believed parents knew best, that they never lied or let you down. What they didn't tell me was that I'd never see them again. The reason they gave for leaving me there sounded so reasonable at the time. My mother was pregnant with my baby sister, Olivia, and they needed a little time to prepare for her arrival. They promised they'd come back soon after she was born. A week, maybe 2, they said. A week turned into a month. A month turned into a year. And by the time I was old enough to understand they weren't coming back, I had stopped waiting. Henry became everything to me. My mentor, my teacher, my family. His ranch was no mansion, but to me, it was a kingdom. We had rolling fields of green and golden hay, a couple of horses, and a herd of cattle. He taught me to care for the animals, how to fix a fence, and, most importantly, how to stand on my own 2 feet. I thrived under Henry's care. At first, it was hard not to wonder if my parents might suddenly pull into the gravel driveway one day, all smiles and hugs, telling me how much they missed me. But as the years went by, the ache of their absence dulled. Henry filled the void. I didn't just learn how to farm from him, I learned how to live. On the rare occasion I got a letter from my parents, it was filled with vague updates about Olivia and the life they were building for her. "Your little sister is such a bright light in our lives," one letter read. "She's growing up so fast." Another letter came with a picture of Olivia, maybe 3 years old at the time, smiling with her parents at a beach somewhere sunny. There was no mention of me. No question about how I was doing. It didn't take long for me to figure out that I had been replaced. By the time I turned 18, I was a fully fledged farmer. Henry and I worked side by side every day, growing the ranch and modernizing its operations. I handled the bookkeeping, learned to negotiate prices with suppliers, and even built a website to attract new customers for our farm-to-table produce. It wasn't easy, but I loved the work. Henry beamed with pride every time he introduced me as my grandson, Gregory, the future of this ranch. His approval meant everything to me, and I worked hard to make him proud. My parents, meanwhile, remained absent. No birthday calls, no visits, not even a Christmas card. I didn't need them, I told myself. I had Henry, but deep down, the resentment festered. On nights when the ranch was quiet, I'd wonder why they abandoned me so easily. Was I too much trouble? Did they love Olivia more? The unanswered questions stayed with me, gnawing at the edges of my peace. It was on my 27th birthday that I finally let go of any hope I had of reconnecting with them. By then, I had taken over most of the ranch's operations. Henry was slowing down, his health not what it used to be. We had just finished dinner, a roast chicken and vegetables, a meal I had cooked myself, when Henry handed me a small box wrapped in faded blue paper. "Open it," he said, smiling. Inside was a gold pocket watch. The hands were worn, and the casing was scratched, but it was beautiful. "It was your father's," Henry said. "He left it here when he moved to the city. Figured you should have it now." I stared at the watch, feeling a surge of anger I hadn't expected. He left it, just like he left me. "I don't want it," I said, setting the watch down on the table. Henry sighed but didn't press me. He understood in a way that only he could. "It's yours if you change your mind," he said simply. That night, I made a promise to myself. I didn't need their approval, their explanations, or their apologies. I had built a life without them, and I was proud of it. If they couldn't see that, it was their loss. But even the strongest foundations can crumble. A year later, Henry passed away in his sleep. I found him in his armchair one morning, a blanket draped over his legs, and a book still open in his lap. He looked peaceful, like he had simply drifted off and never woken up. Losing him felt like losing a part of myself. He had been my rock, my guide, my father in every way that mattered. The funeral was small, just a few neighbors and friends from town. I sent an invitation to my parents, half hoping they might show up out of respect for the man who had raised their son. They didn't come. Not even a phone call. Not even a text. That was the moment I truly cut them out of my heart. I threw myself into the ranch, working harder than ever to keep it thriving. It was my way of honoring Henry, of keeping his legacy alive. I didn't need Caroline or Mark. I didn't need Olivia, or so I thought. After Henry's funeral, the silence in the house was deafening. The walls felt colder without his voice calling out from the kitchen or his boots thudding across the wooden floors. For weeks, I wandered through the ranch with a heavy heart, the ache of loss pressing down on me. Mason, my neighbor and closest friend, came by nearly every day to help with chores and keep me company. I didn't ask him to, but I was grateful. "I can't believe they didn't even show up," Mason said one evening as we repaired a section of fencing that had been knocked down in a storm. His tone was bitter, and I knew he was talking about my parents. "After everything your granddad did for you. For them even." "It's disgusting," I shrugged, hammering a nail into the wooden beam. "I didn't expect them to," I said flatly. "They haven't cared about me for 20 years. Why start now?" But deep down it stung. Henry had been the closest thing to a father Mark ever had, and he couldn't even be bothered to pay his respects. And Caroline, well, she'd always been better at avoiding discomfort than facing it. They probably didn't want to risk seeing me and confronting the choices they made. Cowards. The weeks turned into months, and slowly, I found a rhythm again. Running the ranch was second nature by then. I knew every inch of the land, every animal by name, and every task by heart. Mason became my sounding board, the one person I could vent to when the weight of everything threatened to crush me. One night, as we sat on the porch drinking beers, Mason asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Do you ever think about reaching out to them? Your parents, I mean." I scoffed. Why would I? They made their choice, and so did I. They're strangers to me now. But what about your sister? Olivia? She's not really to blame for what happened. She was a baby. I stiffened at the mention of her name. Olivia, the golden child. The reason I was left behind. I had seen pictures of her over the years in the rare letters Caroline sent. Birthday parties with elaborate cakes, vacations to exotic places, her high school graduation. All the milestones they never bothered to share with me. "She's just as much a stranger as they are," I said, my voice hard. "I don't owe her anything." Mason didn't push the subject after that, but I knew he didn't agree with me. Part of me felt guilty for shutting the door on my sister so firmly, but the resentment I held for my parents bled into every thought of her. She was a part of the life they chose over me, the life I was never invited to. The first time I heard from them in years came in the form of a phone call late one evening. It was a number I didn't recognize, and I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Gregory? It's Caroline." Her voice was shaky, hesitant. I froze. For a moment, I thought it might be a prank, but then she continued. "We need to talk. Your father and I, we're in trouble. We need your help." The audacity of it almost made me laugh. "You're kidding, right?" I said, my tone dripping with sarcasm. "You dropped me off at Grandpa's when I'm 6, disappear for 2 decades, and now you want my help?" "Please, Gregory," she said, her voice cracking. "It's about Olivia." Curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to meet them. They showed up at the ranch a few days later, looking like ghosts of the people I barely remembered. Caroline's once perfectly styled hair was now streaked with gray, and Mark looked gaunt, his face lined with stress. "We don't have anywhere else to turn," Caroline said as she sat across from me at the kitchen table. Her hands trembled as she clutched a cup of coffee Mason had offered her. "Olivia, she's destroyed us." I raised an eyebrow. "Destroyed you? How?" Mark spoke up for the first time. "She stole everything," he said grimly. "The entire family trust. $850,000. Gone. She also sold all of our properties, the house, the vacation home, even your grandfather's old investment lot in the city. She forged our signatures on the documents. And that's not all, Caroline added, her voice barely above a whisper. She took out loans in our names. Over $400,000. My jaw tightened as I listened, anger bubbling in my chest. And you let her do all this? How the hell does that even happen? She always had us wrapped around her finger, Mark admitted, his tone filled with shame. Every time she asked for something, money for a business, a new car, a vacation, we gave it to her. We thought if we kept her happy, she'd stop acting out. I shook my head in disbelief. So, let me get this straight. You ignored me for 20 years to build a life for Olivia, and now she's ruined you? Sounds like karma to me. They tried to plead their case, Caroline cried, talking about how they were drowning in debt and couldn't even pay their basic bills anymore. Mark explained how Olivia had disappeared without a trace, leaving them with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a mountain of unpaid loans. They even had the gall to suggest that Henry's ranch, my ranch, could be sold to help them out of their mess. I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor. You want me to sell the ranch? After everything Grandpa and I worked for? You must be out of your minds. We're your parents, Gregory, Caroline said desperately. We're family. Family. I spat the word like it was poison. You abandoned me. You didn't even come to Grandpa's funeral. You don't get to pull the family card now. Please, Mark said, his voice breaking. We're begging you. I stared at them, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and satisfaction. For the first time in my life, I held the power in our relationship, and I wasn't about to let it go. Caroline and Mark sat across from me in my kitchen, their faces etched with desperation. It was almost surreal seeing them here after all these years, like ghosts from a past life I'd worked hard to bury. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms as they spilled out their sob story. Olivia had left them completely destitute, they explained. After draining the $850,000 family trust, she'd sold every piece of real estate they owned. Their home, a mid-sized house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, had been sold for $520,000. The vacation home, a property they'd often bragged about in those rare letters, went for $350,000. Even the lot in the city Henry had invested in years ago was gone. All of it, they claimed, without their consent. To make matters worse, Olivia had taken out loans totaling $400,000 in their names, forging their signatures on the documents. They discovered this only when the creditors started calling, demanding repayment. The avalanche of debt forced them to sell everything that wasn't bolted down, but it still wasn't enough. Now, they had nothing. No home, no savings, and no way to rebuild. We did everything for her, Caroline sobbed, wiping her eyes with a tissue. We just wanted her to have the life we never had. What exactly does that mean? I asked coldly. Mark sighed, looking defeated. She was demanding. It started small, new clothes, expensive ones. We thought, okay, she's a teenager. She wants to fit in. Then it was the car. She convinced us to buy her a brand new sports car for $90,000 when she turned 18. She said it was the only thing that would make her happy. And you just went along with that? I asked, incredulous. We thought if we gave her what she wanted, she'd stop rebelling, Caroline said, her voice trembling. She had so many issues growing up. She'd skip school, get into fights, hang out with the wrong crowd. We thought we could fix it by keeping her happy. So you bought her happiness? I said, the bitterness in my voice impossible to hide. It got worse after she turned 21, Mark said, shaking his head. She came to us with this grand idea to start a boutique. She needed $100,000 to get it off the ground. We gave it to her. And let me guess, I said dryly, it failed. Within 6 months, he admitted. She barely showed up to run it. Spent most of her time partying or traveling. Then she came back asking for more money. I could feel my anger building with every word. And you just kept giving it to her. Vacations, cars, a failed business. Did you ever think about saying no? Caroline looked down at the table, avoiding my gaze. We thought we were doing the right thing. The right thing? I snapped. The right thing would have been being parents instead of her personal ATM. The more they talked, the angrier I became. It wasn't just about what Olivia had done. It was about the choices Caroline and Mark had made all along the way. Choices that had led to me being abandoned and Olivia being spoiled into oblivion. And now, when their world had come crashing down, they had the audacity to come crawling to me for help. "I'm sorry for your situation," I said, leaning forward, "but it's not my problem. You made your choices, and now you're dealing with the consequences." Caroline's eyes widened in shock. "Gregory, please. You're our son. We're family." I slammed my hand down on the table, making her jump. "Don't you dare use that word with me," I said through gritted teeth. "You're the ones who decided I wasn't part of your family a long time ago." Mark tried to interject, but I held up a hand to stop him. "Let me make this clear. I owe you nothing. Not my time, not my money, not my sympathy. You didn't show up for me when I needed you, and now you want me to bail you out? Forget it." Caroline broke down in tears, but I felt no pity. Mark, ever the silent partner, finally spoke up. "Gregory, please. We're desperate. We've lost everything. If you don't help us, we don't know what we're going to do." "Not my problem," I said flatly. "But Olivia." "Olivia is your problem," I interrupted. "You created this monster. You fed her entitlement and enabled her behavior. Now you're reaping the rewards." I stood up, ready to end the conversation, but something in Caroline's voice stopped me. "Please," she said, her tone softer now, almost pleading. "Help us find her. Help us make her pay for what she's done." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to slam the door on this entire mess and let them deal with the fallout. But another part of me, the part shaped by Henry's values, felt a small pang of obligation, not to them, but to the idea of justice. If Olivia really had stolen all that money and left them with nothing, she deserved to be held accountable. And if helping them meant finally getting some closure, maybe it was worth considering. "I'll think about it," I said finally, my voice cold. "But if I help, it's going to be on my terms." The next morning, I sat down with Mason and laid out the situation. He listened carefully, his brow furrowed as I explained the details of Olivia's betrayal. When I was done, he let out a low whistle. "That's a lot. Are you sure you want to get involved in this?" "I'm not sure about anything," I admitted. "But if she's really out there living it up on stolen money while they're drowning in debt, someone needs to put a stop to it." Mason nodded. "So what's the plan?" "The plan," I said slowly, "is to make them pay for what they've done to me before I lift a finger to help them." Mason raised an eyebrow. "How? They want my help? Fine. But I'm going to make them publicly apologize for abandoning me. And once this is over, they're gone. Out of my life for good." "And Olivia?" he asked. "I'll find her," I said, determination hardening my voice. "And I'll make damn sure she faces justice." Caroline and Mark looked uneasy as they sat in the kitchen again, their hands clasped together like two guilty schoolkids waiting to be scolded. I stood by the counter, arms crossed, letting the silence stretch. They had no idea what was coming. "I've decided I'll help you," I said finally. Caroline let out a sigh of relief, but I held up a hand to stop her. "But, and I mean this is going to be on my terms. And if you don't like it, the door is right there." Mark cleared his throat. "What do you want from us?" I stepped closer to the table, staring both of them down. "First, you're going to publicly apologize to me. I'm talking a full, detailed admission of what you did. Abandoning me, ignoring me, choosing Olivia over me. You're going to own all of it, in writing and in person. And you'll mean it." Caroline's face turned pale. "Gregory, that's not fair." "Fair?" I snapped, slamming my hand on the table. "Fair would have been you showing up for Henry's funeral. Fair would have been you not dumping me on him like I was a bag of garbage while you played house with Olivia. You don't get to lecture me about fairness." Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Mark looked at her, then back at me. "And after we apologize," he asked cautiously, "afterward, I'll help you find Olivia. I'll do whatever it takes to track her down and make her face justice. But once it's done, I don't want to see or hear from either of you ever again." Mark frowned. "Gregory, we're still your parents." "No, you're not," I said, my voice cold and firm. Henry was my parent. You were just two people who happened to give birth to me. If you want my help, you'll do this. If not, there's nothing else to talk about. They left the ranch that night with more hesitation than I expected, promising to think about it. I wasn't holding my breath. Mason, who'd been eavesdropping from the barn, joined me on the porch as I watched their car disappear down the driveway. Think they'll go for it? He asked, handing me a beer. I shook my head. Probably not. But if they don't, it's their loss. You're really ready to walk away from all this if they don't apologize, he pressed. I took a long sip of beer, staring out at the fields. They've already walked away from me, Mason. I just want it on record this time. A week later, they came back. Caroline looked as if she hadn't slept, and Mark's normally calm demeanor had cracked under the weight of their desperation. They stood on the porch, fidgeting nervously, while I leaned against the doorframe with my arms crossed. We'll do it, Caroline said, her voice barely above a whisper. We'll apologize. Good, I said, stepping aside to let them in. Let's get started. I handed them a pen and paper and sat down across from them. Write it out. Everything. Why you left me. Why you chose Olivia. Why you didn't come back. And don't sugarcoat it. Caroline hesitated, looking at Mark for support. He nodded, and she began to write. The sound of the pen scratching against paper was the only noise in the room. When she finished, she handed me the letter with trembling hands. I read it silently, my expression unreadable. It was good, painfully honest, even. She admitted to the guilt she'd buried for years, how she and Mark had convinced themselves I was better off with Henry so they could focus on Olivia. She wrote about the selfishness of their decision, their fear of facing me again, and how their shame had kept them away. For the first time, I saw a glimmer of genuine remorse. Good enough, I said finally. Now we'll film it. Caroline's eyes widened. Film it? Yes, I said firmly. You're going to say all of this on camera. I want it documented. If you're not willing to do that, you can leave now. They agreed. Mason held the camera while Caroline and Mark stood in the living room, fidgeting under the harsh glare of the lights. I stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching them squirm. Caroline cleared her throat and began to speak. We want to apologize to our son, Gregory, she started, her voice trembling. 27 years ago, we made a terrible decision. We left him at his grandfather's ranch and told ourselves it was temporary, but it wasn't. We abandoned him, and we let our shame and selfishness keep us away. Mark picked up where she left off. We focused all our attention on Olivia, thinking we were doing what was best for her. But in doing so, we failed Gregory. We failed him as parents, and we've carried that guilt ever since. We're sorry, Gregory. We can never undo what we've done, but we hope you can forgive us. I said nothing when the camera stopped rolling. I simply nodded, took the recording, and walked out of the room. The next day, I hired Rachel, a private investigator, to track down Olivia. I handed her the information Caroline and Mark had given me, addresses, bank accounts, old emails, and she set to work. It didn't take long to find her. She was living in a luxury high-rise apartment in the city, still spending money like it was water. Rachel uncovered receipts for designer clothes, expensive jewelry, and international flights. She had even rented a Lamborghini for a weekend getaway. She's been busy, Rachel said, handing me a folder of evidence. But she's sloppy. A lot of her transactions are easily traceable. If you want to go after her legally, you've got a strong case. I brought the evidence to Lucas, a lawyer I'd worked with before on ranch-related contracts. He was as ruthless as they came, and he agreed to take on the case without hesitation. She's left a paper trail a mile wide, he said, flipping through the documents. We can definitely get her charged with fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction as I left his office. For the first time, it felt like the power was finally in my hands, not Caroline's, not Mark's, and certainly not Olivia's. That evening, I sat with Mason on the porch again, staring out at the fields. Do you think they'll actually stay out of your life once this is over? He asked. They'd better, I said, my tone hard. They've already taken enough from me. I won't let them take anything more. Mason nodded, clinking his beer bottle against mine. Here's to justice, then. Justice, I echoed, taking a sip. For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally getting it. Tracking Olivia wasn't difficult. Rachel had done an exceptional job gathering evidence of her trail of destruction. The harder part was confronting the reality of how deep her betrayal ran. Every piece of documentation Rachel uncovered painted a picture of someone who had manipulated, stolen, and lied without a shred of remorse. And now, she was living her best life in a high-rise apartment in the city, sipping champagne while Caroline and Mark drowned in the debt she'd left behind. With Rachel's help, I finalized the plan. I wasn't just going to find Olivia, I was going to make her pay. I arrived at Olivia's apartment unannounced. The building's opulence was overwhelming. Marble floors, chandeliers, and a concierge who looked at me like I didn't belong. But I wasn't here to impress anyone. I marched past the desk, ignoring the protests, and knocked sharply on her door. She opened it after a few moments, her face showing surprise before shifting into a wary smile. "Gregory," she said, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness. "Wow, it's been, what, forever?" "Not long enough," I said bluntly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Her apartment was a shrine to excess. Plush furniture, expensive art, and a view of the city that screamed money. She closed the door behind me, crossing her arms. "So, what brings you here? Mom and Dad send you to guilt-trip me?" "No," I said, turning to face her. "They sent me because you destroyed their lives." She rolled her eyes and flopped onto the couch. "Oh, please. They're overreacting. They've always been dramatic." "Dramatic?" My voice rose. "You stole nearly $850,000, sold their properties, and saddled them with $400,000 in loans. That's not dramatic. That's criminal," she shrugged, picking up a glass of wine from the coffee table. "Look, I didn't force them to sign those papers. If they didn't want to co-sign for things, they should have said no. It's their fault for being pushovers." Her indifference stunned me. "Do you even care about what you've done? They're homeless because of you." "Oh, spare me the sob story," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "They'll figure it out. They always do." I took a step closer, my anger boiling over. "Not this time, Olivia. This time, they have nothing left. And neither will you." She laughed, a hollow sound that grated on my nerves. "What's that supposed to mean? You're going to tattle on me? Please. Mom and Dad won't do anything. They never do." "Maybe not," I said, my voice low. "But I will." Her smirk faltered as I pulled out a folder of documents Rachel had compiled. I dropped it onto the table in front of her, and her eyes widened as she flipped through the pages. Bank statements, forged signatures, property sales. Everything was there, laid out in black and white. "What is this?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. "Proof," I said. "Proof of everything you've done. And it's all going to the police." The smug confidence she displayed earlier dissolved in an instant. She tried to reason with me, to charm me, even to cry, but I didn't budge. I wasn't here to negotiate. I was here to deliver justice. Within days, Lucas had filed a lawsuit against her on behalf of Caroline and Mark, citing fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. Olivia was served with legal papers, and the police launched an investigation into her activities. She was charged formally, and the courts froze her accounts while the case was pending. Her luxurious lifestyle came crashing down around her. Caroline and Mark, true to their word, followed through with their public apology. They posted the video we'd recorded online, addressing not just me, but also the community they'd abandoned. It went viral, garnering reactions from neighbors and distant family members alike. For the first time, they faced the consequences of their actions head-on. When the apology was done, they packed what little they had left and left my life for good. True to my ultimatum, I never saw or heard from them again. It wasn't the perfect resolution. It didn't erase the years of pain or the memories of their betrayal, but it was enough. It gave me closure. The court case dragged on for months, but eventually, Olivia pled guilty to several charges in exchange for a lighter sentence. She was ordered to pay restitution to Caroline and Mark, though it was unlikely they'd ever see much of the money. She also received probation and mandatory counseling. It wasn't the harsh punishment I'd hoped for, but it was a start. I visited her once, just before the case concluded. She was staying in a dingy motel, a far cry from the lavish apartment she'd once called home. When she opened the door and saw me, she looked more tired than angry. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice flat. "I wanted to see if you'd finally take responsibility," I said. She laughed bitterly. "Responsibility? For what? Trying to live my life? You wouldn't understand. You've always been the golden boy." "Golden boy?" I repeated, stunned. "You think I had it easy? I was abandoned, Olivia. They left me behind for you. Everything I have, I built myself. You were handed everything, and you threw it all away." Her face twisted with anger, but she didn't respond. I turned to leave, pausing at the door. "You have a chance to fix this," I said quietly. "Don't waste it." The day the case officially closed, I stood on the porch of the ranch, looking out over the fields. Mason joined me, as he always did, and we shared a quiet moment. "It's over, huh?" he said. "Almost," I replied. "There's still a lot to process." "You think they'll ever change?" he asked, referring to Olivia and my parents. I shook my head. "Maybe, but that's not my concern anymore. I'm done carrying their baggage." He nodded, clinking his beer against mine. "Here's to moving on, then." "To moving on," I echoed, taking a sip. For the first time in my life, I felt free. Free of the pain, the anger, and the weight of the past. The ranch was my home, my sanctuary, and my future. And now, nothing and no one could take that away from me.